As a landscape architect, I was influenced a lot by my childhood, as I think most people are. And I grew up on the Oregon coast along a river called the Millicoma. And the influence of that river with its waterfalls, its streams, its still ponds, influenced what I did in the plazas that I had designed here in Vancouver over the years. And although they were created in concrete, they symbolized or referenced these rivers and these streams. And so I've enjoyed going back to these places and found that most people using them didn't realize anyone had even designed them, let alone what they were thinking about when they did design them. And this kind of bothered me. And as time went on, I found that I needed to explore landscape architecture in a more meaningful way. And I need to incorporate something that would give meaning to those places. So I left landscape architecture to pursue art as giving meaning to place. And at Emily Carr, I explored three-dimensional materials, sculpture, and ceramics and stone and everything else. But I fixed on dealing with stone, primarily granite. It's a beautiful material, but it's a hard material to work with. And so borrowing a quote from Michelangelo that every block of stone has a statue inside it, and it is the task of the sculptor to discover it. And with that, I began to deal with these granite blocks as my material, and my job as the sculptor was to decide what is inside it. This is a project I designed before I went to Emily Carr, which was a plaza at Metrotown. And the plaza's function was to be an entry to the shopping center. Burnaby had decided in the meantime that public art was going to be a requirement of these new projects. And the developer said to me, well, Don, you've not only a landscape architect, you've been to Emily Carr, and you're now an artist. Could you take on the job of being the public art artist? This is my first opportunity to actually have the chance to explore what I have been doing. So I took the ideas that I had developed at Emily Carr, which was dealing with the stone. And you'll see this is very much a simple abstract of those studies. The piece is not about the extended landscape. This was incorporating public art into an existing plaza. The next time I had the opportunity was in West Vancouver, when we have been involved with the urban renewal of the village and its connection to the waterfront. And the waterfront is a armored riprap granite shoreline. And the people in the community tended to have a very negative attitude about this granite. It was, to them, just rubble, just rough, broken rock. And as I had been a student studying at Ambleside granite, and this is Texada Island granite, some of the finest in the country, was a very precious material. It was a beautiful material. It sparkles. It's fantastic. And realizing that the people saw it just as rubble. And therefore my task was to inform those people about that waterfront and get them to believe it was as the quality I appreciate it as. I also wanted to incorporate this with its place, which was on the edge of House Sound with its 14-foot high tide difference. So I created several artificial tidal pools that stepped down towards the riprap. In doing this, I used these granite blocks, which were brought from a Soyuz to the site, and incorporated them in the site. And one of the things I was doing there was allowing the person who was delivering it to have some aspect of the piece. The crane operator also had an aspect. So when the trucks arrived, and there were going to be 5 of them, each rock was placed at the time those came in, not knowing what was coming next. And the crane operator, when I wanted pieces out into the water, in the riprap itself, had to take and extend as far as that block would go. Now this is an old crane that we had on the site, so there was quite a limitation to how far he could go. And the aspect was the smaller the granite piece, therefore the lighter, the further out he could get it. So we played with this idea, okay, how far can you go out with that one into the riprap? So the pieces out there were part of a collaboration with the truck drivers bringing the granite, with the crane operator, so it involved that sort of spontaneity of design. So it wasn't something that was pre-designed, it just began to evolve. I incorporated the granite blocks and set them into the rough riprap, stepped them out of the riprap across 2 artificial tidal pools, and ended up being 2 cubes that had the granite blocks emerging from the rough block. These actually were saw cut down and the top polished, and I incorporated a bit of water coming out to spill over the edges that sort of gave animation to those blocks of people going up and like touching wet paint. Kids will come up to those pieces and touch them to see if it's really water, if it's really, really alive. And I found that great delightful. And also what happened in this project is these pieces came through that emerged piece. They came to the plaza, which was refined, and they were the polished blocks. So the people seeing the polished blocks were informed that through the fountain into the riprap, that this was the same material, and our riprap was a precious commodity. West Van had a tidal pool that were artificial man-made fountains. I decided now it was time to actually take natural rock and incorporate it into the natural water feature we have, which is the tide in Vancouver. We have a 14-foot tidal difference. This is really quite extreme. If you go to places like Florida, they only have a few feet. And so designing this in as part of the story was part of what is high tide, how close does it get. In the summer, when you walk in the middle of the day on a waterfront, you'll find the tide is very low. It's high tide during the day in the winter, but during the summer it isn't. So this project had to incorporate that extreme aspect of tides. Here we are at David Lam Park in Yaletown. We've talked about two other pieces, now we're talking about a third one, the High Tide Pavilion at the edge of the water here in the park. In developing the master plan, the city asked us to extend all of these street ends all the way to the waterfront. And this street we're on now is the extension of Pacific Boulevard as it goes under the Burrard Bridge and the Granville Bridge and extends in a symbolic way all the way to the waterfront. In the first two locations, you saw the fountains as operated with equipment. In this case, we find that we have incorporated the stone, but into the natural water that is created by the tides in False Creek. But when I had the opportunity to do this project, I decided to let the tides be the fountain. And so, with a 14-foot difference between low and high tide we have here in Vancouver, we played with that. And we have a relatively low tide right now, but at high tide the water starts coming up over each one of these pads until it comes up almost near the plaza. So interesting thing happened when we were finishing up the project, and I was down here with one of the other contractors with our hard hats on. A passerby came along and asked us if we were involved in the project. We said, of course. And he said, boy, you guys made a mistake. You didn't realize that the high tide, the water comes over the plaza. We smiled. That was part of what I wanted to do, is allow people to have the experience to really see what happens in our tides here in Vancouver. Most of the time it's just up and down off of a vertical wall. So this was really to inform people about the tides we have here, the difference, and get them involved in this. On this one, rather than having polished blocks of granite, I accepted the stone as is. This was an influence of my trips to Japan and China, where especially in China, the Taihu rock is considered the sculpture in the garden. And in Japan, less of it being sculpture, but a great respect for the natural form of stone. So with this project, which began before the buildings were built, I selected 13 of the big boulders that were on site from excavation, the largest one placing it here, the largest and most interesting one even, as a feature. The other 12 are the circle of rocks, which is at the other end of the walkway. The rock in the water and the pavilion around it and the whole aspect of this really talks about two things. It talks about tide, and it talks about our appreciation for our stone. In China and Japan, natural stone is a part of the sculpture, it's part of the garden. We have not tended to do that, and this was to do that. One of the other influences of Asian trips was the Torii Gate that sits out in the inland sea at the Shinto shrine at Miyajima. I saw it many, many years ago for the first time, and it stayed with me as a memory. These red painted Torii gates out in the water. At high tide, they're circled by the water like these columns are, and at low tide, it actually is like we are here. And so when I was dealing with this project, one of the things I wanted to do is capture that which I found really quite interesting in the expression of water and tide. And so I let the columns not come down on the land around it, but actually be in the water itself. So at high tide, the pavilion comes right out of the water. With the design of the pavilion, I decided to include a haiku poem. And the poem reads, "The moon circles the earth and the ocean responds with the rhythm of the tides." These three projects have demonstrated how public art can give meaning and enhance the public spaces that we enjoy. When I've been involved in, as a landscape architect in projects, I've looked for opportunities to include public art. And the ones you've seen are three of several examples that I've been involved in. Public art can enhance and give meaning to place. It can deal with the extended landscape, and it can encourage interaction by the public. It gives the heart and soul to the project.